RTHK Radio 3.
You're listening to Brunch with me, Noreen Meir, this Thursday morning. Now, in the next 15 minutes or so, we're discussing a subject that affects many women that goes unspoken. Now, we're going to be talking about menopause and its impact on mental health. Now, menopause marks a significant transition in a woman's life that typically occurs at about age 45 to 55. And while we hear about some of the physical symptoms of it, like hot flashes and night sweats, less often discussed is also the emotional and the mental health challenges that can accompany this phase. So to comment about this, I'm really delighted to be joined once again by clinical psychologist Quratulain Zaidi from MindNLife Psychology. Good morning to you, Dr. Zaidi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Noreen, for having me.
We are live this morning on Facebook as well. I'd love for our listeners to join us if you are going through menopause, or if you are a spouse or a partner supporting someone through menopause, or you must know somebody who's going through menopause. Feel free to weigh in and to comment. Noreen Meir on RTHK Radio 3. So let's start with the basics. Dr. Zaidi, what is menopause and how can it affect a woman's health and well-being?
So menopause, the definition of it is that when your period has stopped for over a year and you're no longer able to release an egg at this time. So you experience a shift in three important hormones, which is estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. However, it's endocrinologists, and we've got so much more information in the last 5 years about this because we've been vocal about it. It's a topic that's being raised enough, so there is enough information. There still needs to be a lot of research that needs to be done in this topic, but at least we're speaking about it. So what endocrinologists say that it's a fall in the estrogen that brings on the most of the common symptoms experienced by women. However, now, recently in the last 18 months or so, we are also seeing that it's the loss of testosterone and the decline of testosterone that causes the cognitive impairment and a lot of cognitive function. So all these three hormones are involved in how our brain functions as well. That's what we're finding out. So that's therefore the impact, the enormity, and that's a spectrum, right? From mild to severe, the impact on your emotional and cognitive and physical, as well as your psychological well-being. So that's menopause. However, perimenopause is menopause transition, and it is where where reproductive life several years before the menopause, and the ovaries gradually begin to produce less estrogen. So it's the ratio of estrogen and progesterone and the changes in that cause the impact on your daily life. And I see people regularly who come in and say, I've had my hormones checked, but they are normal, and I've been put on. I'm not menopausal, but nobody speaks about the perimenopause because we don't have the data points for those hormones. And recently, only this week, somebody came in and said, I've been put on antidepressants, because I was saying the first protocol is they'll put you on antidepressants. She said, that's exactly what's happened to me. But please go to somebody who will be able to help you with adding a little bit more estrogen and monitoring it. And, with progesterone, if you have your uterus, you need to protect it with the progesterone. So somebody who knows what they're doing and is able to, and sometimes it's just a tiny dose that's needed for you to start feeling like yourself again. So the symptoms you speak about, right? The physical ones, if you didn't have the hot flushes, she didn't have the night sweats, she wasn't going through any of the traditional kind of symptoms that we look for, which are relevant. I'm not saying that they're not relevant, but it is also the brain fog, your memory, the words that, and I used to forget, I still do, by the way, forget words in mid-sentence. So, but I tell my people, they know that I will forget. It will come back to me, but I'm like, I've forgotten it. I could see it. So it's important to know if there is a cognitive impact on you, and if you're not sleeping well. If you're not sleeping well, your body is not recovering during the night.
Absolutely.
Well. So,
I'm not a doctor, but the brain fog is so real because of the drop in estrogen. Your receptors in your brains need the estrogen to help to transmit the messages. And if you've got a dip in it, well, guess what? The messages aren't going to really translate themselves. I'm so glad you brought up perimenopause because I think that the conversation now is starting about menopause, and that typically starts at about 45 or 50. But perimenopause can start between 15 to 10 years before menopause. So you've got women in their mid 30s or in their
Yes.
early 40s who also experience, maybe not to the extent, because let's face it, menopause is also a spectrum. Not everybody will experience the night sweats and the sort of sleeplessness. Good for you if you don't. But it's the intangible things that we don't see. The dip in estrogen will affect your bone density, will actually impact your mental well-being. Also, talk us through some of the symptoms that the clients that you've seen. What's that range of spectrum to give our audience an idea that maybe if we don't have this, we have this. That might also be a sign about menopause.
So it's the insomnia. It's, suddenly you begin to feel rage, or, it's the mood changes,
Yep.
right? That you're, and the inability to, I mean, life just seems harder than it ever did. And look, you're also going through, you've got to remember at this time of your life, from mid 30s to, in your 50s, you are going through your career, you're kind of progressing in your career, you've got your young children and families, and you are also going through, that transition of parenthood, various different transitions. So that in itself is quite taxing, can be stressful, right? So all of that, this happens at the, I feel, the worst time.
When it rains, it pours. Situation.
Really, it does. It kind of, your hormones are changing, and there's so much else going on in your, and what happens is that women tend to put themselves last. It's okay if I didn't sleep well. It's okay if I'm stressed out. It's okay, if I feel real rage, which I never used to, because I can see all of this. It could also just be your hormones as well. So that's where, if you don't feel like yourself in any shape or form, especially in your cognitive ability and things that you used to be able to do, yes, there is an age factor, but I do think that that is a very telling sign that if I hear anybody say, I don't feel like myself, that's where I go, now we need to put in some things in place. So, yeah.
I find it shocking that this isn't really discussed more because women are living longer than ever. And if this starts at about 50, and I'm being a bit more conservative, it might start earlier, but say 50, and we're living over past 80 or 85 in some countries, in some places, we're living a third of our life in this phase, in this menopause. I mean, it's just shocking that it's not really discussed as often, or it's not really passed on from our, grandparents or parents. They never discussed it. But now coming to think about it, I did notice that perhaps at a certain age, there was a bit more of a bad mood or maybe a lack of communication. So I want to talk about that. How does menopause perhaps affect support networks like your family, like your friends, like your work? How does it affect a woman's sort of well-being during this time?
It is such an important point that you bring up, because it's not just you that's impacted, it's the
The
whole
social
system
network,
that
yeah.
you're in, right? Which is your family, your children, your work colleagues, as you say, because you have to work so much harder
To
at being yourself.
conceal. Yes.
Yes, right? And be present for everybody else, because I certainly wear many hats in my life. So, I'm a psychologist, I run a business, I'm a mentor. Yeah, that's just the work part, right? And then at home, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. And all of those are privileges, but you have to, you step into those roles and you try to do your best. And there are days when it's really, really hard to be able to, be present for all of these people. So sharing with them, I'm very vocal about it, that I'm kind of in my rage phase, right? For me, I'm not an angry person. I'm just one of those slow burners, and I try to let it go. I'd never explode. But that was a big change for me, that, just the frustration that I would feel, which I'd never felt. So just letting them know that, look, this is a period where these days are going to be a bit challenging, or I'm feeling like this. That helps communicating. But how can you do that? You should be able to do that at work as well. People should have an understanding of it, that there are transitions that people go through, and maybe they're not performing, they're not 100% today, not just because they're going through menopause, but it could be any other reasons as well, but surely because of menopause as well, right?
Insomnia
So
will
you
do it. If you're not sleeping, if you're not
absolutely,
resting,
right?
how you're gonna, be 120%? You might be 80% if you're lucky.
Yeah, 20% actually.
2%.
Right. And that it's important to be able to take know the people and be able to support them and let things go if they're a bit off, right? So I think education, talking about it, and you then being able to say, I'm having the 20% day today.
Yeah. What about some misconceptions that people have about menopause? I think one thing that comes to mind, and it's not necessarily it's menopause related, but sort of if you see a lady in a bad mood, I remember back in the 90s, or, back 20 years ago, people were like, oh yeah, PMS. And it's just so quick to just say it in a derogatory way. And let's face it, when the hormones changes, it really can affect your mental well-being. It can affect your mood. It really does. I feel like there needs to be a bigger conversation. And of course, I'm not saying that women don't take a responsibility. Sure, you can also take responsibility with the way we react, but it's so quick to just put it down to, oh, PMS or something in a derogatory way without the empathy. What sorts of misconceptions have you seen when it comes to menopause?
It very much is. I've seen it in a room full of, it was said, I think in the last 2 years, where I'm surrounded by menopausal women in this particular setting. And it's really hard for me. It was coming from a male. And I'm like, really, tell me a bit more about that. What do you mean? What exactly do you mean by that, right? So yeah, you have to call it out. It is a misconception that it's about not taking responsibility for what you haven't done in the professional setting and just blaming it on the gender or what they may be going through.
Agree. One thing I'd like to also say, it's a natural phase of life. It really is a privilege. It's great to get old and older, and menopause is just part of it. One point I want to talk about, and we've only got 5 minutes left, Dr. Zaidi, how can women advocate for their mental health or just general health? I think you mentioned it right at the beginning. More studies, more information is now known about things which are perhaps linked to menopause, diseases, disorders, which are perhaps linked to menopause, that perhaps before a GP or a doctor would just say, oh, you're depressed or something, but it's linked to menopause. How can women sort of better advocate for themselves when a doctor is, say, not as may not have all the information available?
It is so true. So yes, we don't have the data points of what perimenopausal estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of that. But again, it's so individual. It is just so individual, and there is so much work that needs to be done. So at the minute, what we work with is managing the symptoms. So if somebody goes in and says, I'm feeling sad, I don't feel like getting out of bed, I don't have the energy, and I'm not sleeping well, and it is, so all of that, and you look at the age of that person, then instead of going first to antidepressants and saying, yeah, let's do that, because there is still an inhibition for HRT, especially in Asia.
Yeah.
There is,
And that's
and
hormone
people,
replacement therapy. Sure.
yes, it is. So it's the replacement of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So you can add in, maybe that's a conversation to have with your clinician. Can we try this first before you put me on SSRIs or SNRIs, which are the antidepressants, right, to manage these symptoms? And if you can sleep better, you will feel better in the morning, right? So if you've addressed that with your progesterone and estrogen, then you're able to kind of function better. Therefore, it wasn't depression. Do you see what I mean? So it is nuanced. It has to be individualized, and the clinicians have to be on board to be able to look at it, that you're not just depressed. Who's a, as I said, recently, a 47-year-old put on antidepressants, and I'm saying, please, but try this first, because there's no impact with the SSRIs for her.
Yeah.
So depression, feeling more anxiety, any of that needs to be kind of spoken about, and maybe within the antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication, we need to add in the conversation of HRT.
Yeah, Dr. Zaidi, do you have sort of people coming to see you and they're describing all these symptoms or these signs, and you're really empathetic? Are you sort of like, this could just be the transition phase, this could be menopause, or have you
I
come
am every session, anybody, I check their age, they say this, I
got
ask them what their
rage
age
and
is,
yeah,
and
and can't sleep, yeah.
I say to them, I was walking in fog. It was black and white. I started doing HRT and my world turned color again. That's the example I give for myself. But again, clinicians who know what they're doing, they're educated about HRT, they monitor you. It is so important to find the right practitioners.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
important. Okay, well, Dr. Zaidi, it's always such a pleasure to chat with you. Remind our listeners once again, how can we find out more about you and your work? Are you on social media, or what's your website?
It's mindandlife.com, where you can find myself and my team of clinicians to support you. And we have the Instagram as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. So you can find us, on all of those forums. And this is something I'm very passionate about. So any questions, very happy to answer.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to chatting with you again and also revisiting this topic. Perhaps next time we can also explore perimenopause, which is even less spoken about, a topic for another time. Meanwhile, thank you so much to Dr. Quratulain Zaidi from MindNLife. Thank you very much indeed.